19-year-old Stephen Smith was a nursing student in Hampton County, South Carolina. In the early morning hours of July 8, 2015, he was found dead lying in the middle of a dark country road. His death would be the first in a long line of heartaches and tragedies connected to Alex Murdaugh and his family. Was Stephen Smith's killing an intentional murder, a hate crime, or a hit and run? As the Alex Murdaugh trial captures worldwide attention, let's not forget what might have been the first victim to lose his life in a tidal wave of unchecked power and greed. Thanks for joining me for The Murdaughs and the Killing of Stephen Smith. As a note, I'm going to refer to Stephen Smith's death as a killing because no matter what finally becomes the manner of death, it wasn't a natural death. He was killed. In order to understand Stephen Smith's connection to the Murdaugh family, it helps to know about the trail of murders and deaths that might connect us back to a 19-year-old young man being found dead on a dark country road. Until recently, Alex Murdaugh was an attorney for a powerful and storied family in Hampton County, a part of South Carolina's Low Country. The Murdaughs had two sons, Paul and Richard. Everyone calls Richard Buster, so I will too. On June 7th, 2021, Paul was found dead along with his mother Maggie on the family's isolated property. The Murdaugh family has ruled the courts and influenced the legal system for at least 100 years in this tiny hamlet of South Carolina. At least they did until Alex Murdaugh's greed was exposed. As it turns out, this respected son of Hampton County had been stealing millions of dollars from his clients, his friends, and the family firm he represented. His financial malfeasance might have remained somewhat manageable if not for the events of February 29, 2019, when witnesses reported that Alex Murdaugh's 19-year-old son Paul had drunkenly crashed the family boat into a bridge, throwing several of its passengers into the water. The body of one of those passengers, 19-year-old Mallory Beach, wouldn't be found until a week later. Ms. Beach's parents would later sue Alex Murdaugh, forcing him to reveal the details of his finances. It was this disclosure that set Murdaugh's world on fire, exposing a level of greed on a scale few in South Carolina could have imagined. Starting with Stephen's death, here's a brief timeline of the mayhem surrounding the Murdaugh families and all that it comes in contact with. July 8, 2015, Stephen Smith is found dead. February 23, 2019, Paul Murdaugh and several of his friends are involved in a boat crash that leave 19-year-old Mallory Beach dead. March 2019, Beach's parents file a lawsuit. April 18, 2019, Paul Murdaugh is charged with 3 felony counts in connection with the boat crash. He would later plead not guilty. June 7, 2021, Alex Murdaugh calls 911 to report that his wife Maggie and his son Paul have been shot and killed at the family's rural hunting property about 65 miles west of Charleston, South Carolina. June 22, 2021, state officials announce they're reopening investigations into the death of Stephen Smith based on information gathered during investigations into the murders of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh. July 14, 2022, Alex Murdaugh is indicted on 2 counts of murder in the fatal shooting of his wife and son. With that timeline and bit of perspective, let's talk about the death and then the life of Stephen Smith. On July 8, 2015, at 3:48 a.m., a driver called 911 to report a body lying across the yellow lines of Sandy Run Road. He told the operator he was concerned that someone might hit this person. When the police arrived, they discovered 19-year-old Stephen Smith's body. Smith's car would be found nearly 3 miles away, with his car's gas cap unscrewed hanging down from the gas tank. They would also find his wallet in the car. If you've been reading and paying attention to this case, it may be confusing as to who said what and when. So I went in search of the report that was written by the police and the highway patrol. Instead of speculating about what was going on, I'm going to read to you the remarks made at the bottom of the report by the police after they had consulted with MATE, which is the South Carolina Highway Patrol. The note says, "The victim was found in the middle of Sandy Run Road, deceased from some sort of blunt force trauma to the head. Responded to the scene. I saw no vehicle debris, skid marks, or injuries consistent with anyone being struck by a vehicle. The victim's shoes were loosely tied and both still on, a point I'll get back to in a minute. After consulting with MATE, the Highway Patrol, we see no evidence to suggest the victim was struck by a vehicle. The incident is still under investigation with supplemental report to follow." They couldn't find any evidence that Stephen had been in an accident, nor did Stephen's body have any injuries one might sustain as a result of being hit by a car or a truck. Michael Duncan, a retired corporal who was part of the accident investigation team, said, "It definitely was not a hit and run. He had blunt force trauma to the head. It seems to have been an intentional act, which we consider homicide." According to the same incident report I quoted from, the coroner verbally communicated to the officer that he thought that it was a homicide as a result of a gunshot wound. Also noting Smith had defensive wounds on his arms and trauma to his head and forehead. For me, probably the most profound piece of evidence that Stephen Smith was not the victim of a hit and run was the fact that his shoes, as they say in the report, loosely tied, were still on his feet. Accident reconstructionists tell us that being hit by a vehicle is a violent act, and nearly every time it happens, the person struck loses their shoes. In most cities and counties in the United States, if the coroner says it's a murder, it's a murder. But in South Carolina, the pathologist has the final word. And she ruled in this case that Stephen Smith's death was the result of a hit and run. Reading the pathologist's findings, the investigator from the Highway Patrol was so confounded by the pathologist's findings that he reached out to talk to her directly. And the exchange, as reported in the report that he wrote, is fairly tense. When asked why, in spite of Highway Patrol not finding any evidence of a collision, she thought that Stephen Smith was the victim of a hit and run, she said it was because he was found lying in the middle of the road. To be somewhat fair to the pathologist, I have to say at this point that she is the person who discovered that Stephen Smith did not die from a gunshot wound, which was the theory the police had after they had the theory that he had been struck by a vehicle. So the question at the time and since is, why would a sober and smart 19-year-old who grew up in the area get out of his car on a dark country road in the middle of the night instead of calling for help using the phone that was found in his right pocket? Why would he leave his wallet in the car if he needed gas? Why wouldn't he call his twin sister or father to come and get him? They weren't that far away. Investigators would later say that they couldn't get the phone to power on, but I don't know if that means they tried it without the benefit of a power source, or perhaps it was broken at the time of his killing. Sandy Smith, Stephen's mother, knew something was wrong right away, and she would not and will not stop until she has answers about her son's death that make sense. Before the investigation stopped the first time, the police began reaching out to Smith's friends, and one of the things that they heard over and over and over again, as many as 40 times, was that Buster Murdaugh and his friends killed Stephen Smith. Okay, I say the one thing they heard over again, but there was another thing that came along with the account of Smith's death, which was that he had had a relationship of some kind with Buster Murdaugh. Buster and Stephen had gone to school together and played baseball in the same league briefly. Smith was out and gay, and Buster has a longtime girlfriend and is straight. As you might well imagine, the rumors started flying fast and furious, as they only can in a small southern town. And as much as I am loath to repeat a rumor, in light of the reopened case, I'll tell you a few of the common theories. The one repeatedly was that Buster Murdaugh and a few of his friends were riding around and they spotted Stephen's car on the side of the road. They turned around to screw with Stephen as he walked down the road. The story goes that the group stuck something out of the window that struck Stephen as he walked along, and Buster Murdaugh was thought to be driving the truck. There are other versions, but I will stick with that one because that seems to be the most commonly repeated. I want to make it clear again that these are rumors based on tales and stories told to the police, but they're not based in verifiable facts. When someone dies under suspicious circumstances, all the hidden parts of their lives are exposed. While digging around Smith's young life, police found that he was working from time to time as an escort. This only matters because it adds to the potential pool of suspects. Added to that was an older man no one seemed to know who showed up at Stephen's funeral calling himself Stephen's boyfriend. The man, whose name is Mark, was interviewed by the police, and in that interview, he confirmed Stephen was an on-again, off-again escort. He told the police he talked to Stephen at 3 a.m. the night he was killed. He asked Stephen if he was walking down the road, and he said that Stephen told him no. Mark went on to tell police he believed the escort agency had something to do with Stephen's death. Other people confirmed Stephen was working as an escort through an agency and Craigslist. Mark also told police that Stephen had said he had been harassed by a couple of guys he described as rednecks in a pickup truck. It's important to know that Mark has a history of mental health issues, and the police interview with him is all over the shop. You can see the problem when rumors and speculation fill in the gaps where facts belong. One last thing, after Stephen's death, his father went to the police station, and while he was there, he got a call from Buster's uncle, Randy Murdaugh, offering to investigate Stephen's death. He told the father that he'd need access to Stephen's cell phone data and call logs and passwords. Sandy, Stephen's mother, reported that she had seen Alec and that same brother at the scene where Stephen was found dead. The Murdaughs have denied that the phone call to Stephen's father took place, but surely there must have been other people who saw them at the crime scene. 3 months after Stephen's death, his father, Joel Fred Smith, died suddenly. In 2021, while investigating the murders of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh, SLED, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, which only investigates homicides, found evidence related to Stephen Smith's killing and reopened an investigation into his death. We don't know what that evidence is or whether it will prove to be decisive. Stephen Smith was studying to be a nurse at the Orangeburg Calhoun Technical College, hoping eventually to become a doctor. I have to say, I am struck by the powerful strength of his mother and other mothers like her who sadly find themselves coping with unimaginable loss and grief. She said in an interview, when the case was reopened, the media from across the country beat a path to her door wanting a story. She said, "All they want is a story. I just want to know what happened to my son." Sandy said of her son, Stephen was born premature. He weighed 2 pounds and 12 ounces. His twin sister Stephanie was 2 pounds and 6 ounces. At the time of his killing, he was 5'8" and 165 pounds. Sandy said Stephen loved the water and he loved to fish. He was funny. Thanksgiving was his favorite holiday. He liked to read, and his dream was to be a doctor overseas. He was putting himself through college when he was killed. Sandy Smith said fiercely, "People need to realize they stole from him. They stole from us." Sandy Smith says, she did hear from Stephen and Stephanie that he was bullied occasionally in high school for being gay. But for the most part, she said, he ignored it. She went on, and that's what I loved about him the most, is, you could do whatever, and he'd hold his head up high and keep going, she said. Stephen's sexuality was never a problem for the family, Sandy said, laughing while recalling a story. Once, while Sandy, Stephen, and Stephanie were walking back to their car after attending a carnival, a man approached them, and the man said someone inside the carnival wanted to chat with Stephen. When he came back, I said, "What was that all about?" And Stephen said, "Well, Mom, if you get a call from a strange number, just don't answer it. I wanted to give him a working number, but just not mine, so I gave him yours." Stephen was very close to his twin sister, and they would sometimes drive to the LGBTQ bar or bars in Columbia and Charleston. He and Sandy would talk about guys he was talking to without ever mentioning names. She said, "He never had to come out. He always knew we loved him. While the mother and daughter think he was killed because he was gay, Sandy and Stephanie think the media focuses too much on his sexuality. His mother said, "I want Stephen to be remembered as Stephen and not just some gay kid that got beat up because he was gay. Because he was a person, no matter what. He always said, 'God made me and God doesn't make mistakes.' He said, 'I am who I am,' and that's what he was." Hopefully, we will finally learn why anyone would want to kill Stephen Smith in the bloom of his very young life. One of the haunting aspects of this terrible series of events is that the corrupting influence of unchecked power and greed can corrupt everything it touches. Even though the investigation into Stephen Smith's killing was eventually dropped, I have to say I am somewhat buoyed by the fact that the police, the highway patrol, and the coroner would not be put off the scent of the Murdaughs. Even though the police said that it might have been a hit and run, once they had consulted with the highway patrol, they went on to interview Stephen Smith's friends. They were asking about Smith and Murdaugh's possible sexual or romantic connection in a part of the country where those sorts of questions are not common. While I don't have enough evidence to assert that this is what happens, it seems that the people on the ground followed the trail where it was leading them, but it was the higher-ups who seemed to curtail the investigation for reasons we don't know yet. Hopefully we'll find out if that is even true. As the mystery into who killed Stephen Smith unravels, hopefully, I think it's important to keep in mind that South Carolina doesn't have any hate crime protection for LGBTQ folks. Sandy Smith says that Stephen should be honored for his whole life, and I agree. He should be mourned for the promise upended and for his family's heartbreak. I will keep you posted when and if there is an arrest in the killing of Stephen Smith. Please subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.